see, records. Okay, I think it is recording. Do you have a notification that says it's recording?
I can't see anything, but yes, I have. It is recording. It says so at the top left-hand side.
All right, perfect. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Oh my gosh. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And we are joined by the brilliant Chris Williamson, former MP for Derby North of the Labour Party, but then unfortunately, due to the fake anti-Semitism crisis, he was ousted and had to run as an independent. He is still very much an activist, a social justice, anti-imperialist activist, and is very much a journalist in his own right. He's the host of his own YouTube show, Festival of Resistance, or Resistance Festival, right? Or
Resistance TV. Resistance TV, we've called it, yeah. RTV.
Exactly. Resistance TV, which really is a brilliant program. He gets guests that I'm actually quite jealous of you, Chris, because you get guests I wish I could get on 1+1, but we're gonna leave that aside. And first of all, thank you very much for joining us again, Chris.
No, thanks for inviting me, Youri.
It's an honor to have you on, and Chris, really like your program, and I'm actually quite upset a bit because I've had you on the show twice, and I've had another guest I really like on the show 3 times, Rick Sterling, but you two seem to be my most underrated guests. So even though 1+1 is a very underrated show, which at the best of times gets 100-something audience, and for some guests, so like Whitney Webb, we had like 300-something viewers. But for some reason, you and Rick Sterling are quite underrated. But hey, you were the one that told me that doing a show like this is like planting a garden. It's like planting trees. It just takes a while to grow. So hopefully the audience will grow on you and Rick.
Yes, I hope so. Yeah.
All right. Well, on to the issues at hand then, Chris, which is, first of all, before we get into the latest dust-up with, Jeremy Corbyn, can you briefly explain how the ongoing coronavirus crisis that is having a devastating effect in Britain, and you even argued that that's actually even worse than what's taking place in the U.S. and other parts of the world, right? At least in the more developed Western world, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think at one point Britain had the highest death rate per capita anywhere in the world, including the US. I mean, things haven't really improved that much. We may not be at the top of the league, but we're certainly near the top of a league you wouldn't want to be anywhere near the top of, obviously, because it's having a devastating effect on families, on individuals up and down the country. People losing their lives. The way in which the government has approached it has been incredibly haphazard. And what they've done is actually use it as an opportunity to pursue their ideological agenda of privatization and outsourcing. And so things like the test and trace system has been outsourced to a private company, and they've been incredibly inefficient. Similarly, with the PPE contracts, they've been mishandled. And the National Health Service has been really struggling to cope. But I think if the issue had been addressed by the public sector from the outset, and they'd used the in-house NHS facilities, for example, to do test and tracing, then not only would it be less expensive, I think it would have been considerably more efficient and effective, and would have saved lives. I mean, people have lost their lives because of the ideological agenda that this Conservative administration has been pursuing. And what is particularly regrettable, I think, on top of that, is the fact that the Labour Party under its new leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has been absent from the field of battle. They've hardly held them to account at all. And Keir Starmer has been falling over himself to agree with Boris Johnson. I mean, there's been the odd criticism here and there, and he seems to have woken up a little bit this last week or so, Keir Starmer, that is, in terms of his challenge to the government. But, it's very half-hearted, and you expect from the official opposition in the House of Commons to actually, speak out and hold the government to account, and they haven't been doing that.
And before we get on, and we actually could talk for hours about the whole coronavirus crisis, but I'm just going to say one more thing before we unfortunately have to put that aside, since we're pressed for time, is that with a highly infectious disease like this coronavirus, I mean, it's called COVID-19 because it's really a new brand, something even more dangerous than the previous coronaviruses. And with a highly infectious disease, people should be staying at home. People should not be working unless it really is a thing like, a supermarket or something like that. And with a highly infectious disease, people should not be, in school. They should not be in work, and we should try to have minimal contact with one another as possible. But Boris Johnson, along with the rest of the suicidal capitalist governments that we have, including social democratic governments, have done the whole back to work, back to school thing. And Starmer made it very clear that he actually supports that 100%. And then, wow, lo and behold, the numbers keep spiking, the deaths keep rising, and it's just astounding. Very much astounding, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Keir Starmer was more bullish about the back to school mantra than even the Conservatives were at one point in time. So it's hardly surprising then that there's been a spike as a consequence of that. And just the whole process, I think, in this country has been mishandled from start to finish, both in terms of the way the government has tackled it and the way in which the opposition has gone about challenging them and holding them to account and being an official opposition. I mean, they've just been, as I've already said, I think, absent from the field. And the consequences of that are absolutely devastating, of course, because people, as a direct consequence of that mishandling, have lost their lives. And, the opposition should be doing more, I think, to push the government to make the right decisions. But unfortunately, with the kind of ideology which permeates the present administration, that they seem set on a particular course, and nothing seems to be capable of forcing them to deviate from that. And it's one of the reasons I think we need to be building extra parliamentary activities to push the government, because unfortunately our elected representatives who are supposed to be doing that job are falling down, unfortunately, and not doing it.
And what's your response? One last thing about the coronavirus before we talk about this awful bill, which the government with the opposition party passed and latest dust up with Mr. Corbyn. What's your response? John Pilger was on Afshin Rattanzi's program, Going Underground, on RT, and John Pilger said that the government was doing military training in hospitals and so forth to plan for a pandemic such as this, but instead of properly putting in the resources necessary to make sure that when a pandemic happens like this, that they're well prepared, the government still decided to privatize the NHS, undercut the NHS, do these partnerships with big corporations which have swindled the NHS. What's your response to that? I know it sounds a bit conspiracy theory, but I think coming from John Pilger, there must be a lot of truth to that.
Well, that is absolutely true. I mean, it's not a conspiracy. There was a planned sort of dry run, if you like, to see how prepared the NHS were for a pandemic. I think it was in 2016 this was staged, and it revealed that the NHS was woefully unprepared to actually be able to cope, and that recommendations were made for extra preparedness to be invested in and more resources made available and so on. And that was completely ignored, unfortunately. And the consequences have been, of course, that when the pandemic struck, we were woefully ill prepared, and the NHS was overwhelmed, didn't have adequate PPE, and it was a complete mess, frankly, from start to finish. And the fact that they were warned about it really, I think, makes the whole fact that they were unprepared even more shameful. It's not as if it was a surprise. I mean, you know, you
It's
shouldn't
kind of like
really have a sort of dry run
Grenfell
any
on
event.
steroids.
Say again?
It's kind of like Grenfell on steroids.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, indeed. I mean, look, you know, they were warned, and you know, it's common sense anyway, you know, to looking at the NHS that there were gaps, I think, but this was then confirmed by this dry run that they put in place, and the recommendations from that weren't acted upon, and the consequences are here for all to see. And of course, the other thing which the government are not doing is actually looking out for those people who have been unable to work because of the lockdown and will be unable to work again when the new lockdown comes in. And in fact, the furlough scheme that they put in place last time, which was 80% of people's salary, is going to be even less this time. And when people are surviving on the minimum wage, which is inadequate in any event to be able to survive, I mean, the biggest increase in poverty in Britain is in work poverty. And the minimum wage is woefully inadequate. And so to expect people to live on previously 80% and now 67%, I think it is. And many people were, I mean, I spoke to a number of people who were, their headline salary was somewhat above the minimum wage, but that was based upon, you know, them meeting targets, you know, and commission and so on. And so when they were put on furlough, they weren't able to make that commission, obviously. And so they were really, really struggling. And even people on, you know, relatively decent salaries under normal circumstances. I mean, for example, the guy who helped us sort of choose a printer for my office. I mean, the kind of the salesman for the company, you know, he was on a relatively you know, generous salary, but that was all on, most of that was commission, and his basic salary was very low. And he was telling me that he was desperate to get back to work because he was struggling to pay his mortgage. I mean, the furlough, this was on it when it was 80%. The furlough was just not cutting it for him. And that story will be repeated all over the country for millions and millions of families.
Unbelievable, which is why we need a system, which is not the capitalist system, which is wholly inadequate, very backwards. And it's amazing how the powers to be aren't even suspending the rules of capitalism to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. But I
mean, even I mean, obviously, I'm a socialist and want to see an alternative system to capitalism put in place. But I mean, even under a capitalist system, the fact that Britain is a currency issuing nation, its own sovereign currency, it does have enormous flexibility. Money is literally no object. I mean, you know, finding the money isn't the problem. You know, the fiscal deficit is not really an issue, so long as you're not spending above the spare capacity, the idle capacity that is available in the economy. And there's plenty of idle capacity in Britain. We've got, you know, many people unemployed, and that will increase. We've got a lot of people underemployed. There's a massive infrastructure shortfall. There's a shortfall in terms of addressing climate change in Britain. There's a shortfall in terms of good quality public services, shortfall in social care. I mean, right across the piece. So there's massive shortfalls and massive deficits in that sense that are important, do need to be addressed. And the only deficit that the politicians seem to be obsessed about, and the establishment seem to be obsessed about, is the only one that really doesn't matter that much, and that's the fiscal deficit. And as I say, that makes it even more unforgivable, you know. I mean, it's a different kettle of fish perhaps in the Eurozone, you know, where countries use the euro, where they're not actually in control of their own kind of money supply in that sense.
exactly.
But in Britain, of course, that's not the case. We have our own central bank, we have our own sovereign currency, and we should therefore use that flexibility that we have at our disposal to make sure that we care for people, look out for people, and ensure that, you know, we're creating a good society. And certainly in this emergency situation that we are in right now, I mean, they could have quite easily given everybody. I mean, I'm not necessarily a big fan of universal basic income, exactly. But as a short-term measure, I mean, I prefer a job guarantee scheme under normal circumstances. But in these situations, you know, they could have had a temporary universal basic income for everybody, because even with the 80% furlough scheme that they put into place, many people fell through the gaps. A lot of self-employed workers and so on fell through the gaps. So, you know, some people.
And I also have to, and I also have to say, before we get on to the two other big topics that I want to talk to you about, is that so much for the Thatcher revolution. We've had years of Reaganomics, Rogernomics, Thatchernomics in Britain with Thatcher, and even beforehand, I would say that Harold Wilson was very business friendly with the international community and having the IMF dictate to Britain how to deal with the financial crisis. And
there wasn't a financial crisis, though, under Harold Wilson. When Dennis Healey, the Chancellor of the day in 1976, went to the IMF, there wasn't any crisis. I mean, that was just smoke and mirrors, actually, and that paved the way for Margaret Thatcher and the neoliberalism that we've been living with ever since. But I mean, the antecedents for that were put in place when Dennis Healey, the Chancellor, went to the.
And if that system was so wonderful, which everybody keeps praising, Thatcher and Blairism, which is the Blair Witch Project, which was basically an extension of Thatcherism and Reaganomics and the whole third way, which was basically, again, an old way of, shock doctrines extraordinaire. If that system was so great, we would not be in this crisis where where every government across the planet is completely deer in the headlights on how to deal with coronavirus and is doing more and is putting more profits over people which is why the whole back to work, back to school scheme. I mean, it's suicidal, but for them it makes perfect sense because we can't crash the economy. Well, when everyone gets coronavirus, that is crashing the economy. But
well, indeed, I mean, and if you look at countries around the world that have more interventionist governments, then they manage the corona crisis far more effectively than laissez-faire governments like Great Britain and the US,
and even Brazil, for that matter. And new topic.
Bolsonaro, of course. I mean, another turbocharged kind of neoliberal, isn't it?
So very briefly before we talk about the Jeremy Corbyn dust up. So Britain. So the ruling Tory government and the Labour fake opposition, which I call a rival oligarchic controlled opposition, has just decided to give the British deep state complete immunity to do crimes against humanity, and they're never, ever going to be held to account for it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bill that's going through Parliament right now that will give carte blanche to the security services and the police to commit criminal acts, to detect and prevent crime, ironically, so they're saying you can commit crime in order to stop crime. But the sort of criterion upon which that can be deployed includes anything which is deemed to be not in the economic interests of the UK. So that could, and I'm sure will, mean anti-capitalist campaigners could be targeted because their default position, their ideological position is that, neoliberal capitalism, corporate capitalism is in the UK's economic best interest, which we know obviously it isn't, but it's all in their kind of way in which it's interpreted. And that's incredibly disturbing that could be therefore deployed against anti-capitalist campaigners. And indeed, we've already heard that the government are banning the teaching of anti-capitalism in schools. I mean, kids are not going to be able to be exposed to those ideas around.
So Charles Dickens is going to be off of the.
Well, you wonder, don't you? I mean, it's indeed. It's just kind of it's a very sort of like Orwellian, chilling sort of dystopian future that they're mapping out there, and. Of course, the other one where the other criterion which is specified in the bill, which will enable criminal behaviour to be deployed, is in dealing with the disturbances. So, demonstrations, protests, etc. And apparently, a motion was put forward, an amendment in the House to explicitly exclude from this provision the right for the security services and the police to murder, rape and torture people, and that was voted down. So by virtue of that, it seems that anything is on the card. So it would seem.
But that provision was struck down. The amendment. The fact that, I mean, for heaven's sakes, the deep state, the British deep state, and the police, and the military abroad raping people and not even being.
Well, I mean, that's another bill, Youri. I mean, there's another bill, the Overseas Territories Bill, which will essentially give carte blanche to war crimes. I mean, what it's about really doing is drawing a veil over those crimes against humanity, war crimes that might be perpetrated by British forces, and it will put in place a time limit to bring any sort of charges on that. So once a certain time, I think it's 4 or 5 years has passed, then they will be exempt from any potential prosecution. So wow. It's it's very troubling to say the least. And of course, it's important to remember that Keir Starmer whipped his MPs in the House, instructed them essentially not to oppose either the Overseas Territories Bill, basically the green light for war crimes, or indeed the ability of the security services and the police to commit criminal acts against British citizens in the pursuit of deterring and detecting and preventing crime.
One last thing about that before we talk about Jeremy Corbyn then is, do you think the ruling Tory government and the Labour Party is supporting this, and it is going to pass? No ifs or buts about it. It is going to pass these two monstrous bills, which legalizes state murder. Do you think that the government and the Labour Party under her Starmer has passed this so that it makes it more easier to send Julian Assange off to the vultures in Virginia, because Julian Assange has exposed systemic war crimes and systemic crimes against humanity, which is why the few of us, part of the anti-imperialist movement, have been protesting, have been doing programs like this. But now that, okay, if a law like this gets passed, that means that Julian Assange really is the criminal, and therefore off to the vultures in Washington and Virginia he goes.
I mean, I don't think these bills will have any direct impact on Julian's case, but what it will certainly do is make it more difficult for people like Julian in the future. And actually, I think it illustrates the importance of the sort of journalism that Julian was leading, was spearheading, that we absolutely need fearless journalism of the type that WikiLeaks and Julian exemplified, in order to bring to the attention of the public the abuse, the abuse of state power. And this is going to be made much easier to abuse state power with this legislation, which is going through the Houses of Parliament right now. I mean, on the Julian case, I mean, the leader of the Labour Party right now, Sir Keir Starmer, was the former Director of Public Prosecutions, and was involved in trying to get... decidedly unhelpful in Julian's case. And Julian shouldn't be incarcerated. I mean, the man is an international hero, in my opinion, an absolutely essential figure and a beacon of free speech and a free press. And to see him treated the way he's been on British soil brings eternal shame, I think, on Britain and all those politicians that have failed to speak out. I mean, very, very few and far between. I was about the only politician when I was an MP who spoke out and supported Julian Assange. Jeremy did make a statement when he was dragged out of, Jeremy Corbyn that is, out of the Ecuadorian embassy. The shadow Home Secretary at the time, Diane Abbott, made a statement in the House, but that was about it. I mean, subsequent to the last general election, Jeremy's spoken out a bit more, and indeed the former Shadow Chancellor has been to visit Julian, John McDonnell, and has spoken out, and I think Richard Bergen has, and one or two others, but it is very, very few. Also, you know what? This is a perfect segue then to the latest dust up with Jeremy Corbyn, but because I think they spoke out too little, too late. Should have done it from the get-go, the moment Jeremy was in opposition, even against David Cameron, who was a much more popular Tory leader than Theresa May.
free Julian Assange, free Julian Assange, and that means brings us to the current topic at hand before you have to go, which is, okay, you mentioned Mr. Starmer. I call him her Starmer because he is a soft fascist Stalinist dictator of a man. He was involved in trying to get Julian Assange off to Sweden and told the Swedes not to get cold feet. Let's talk about this latest dust-up with Jeremy Corbyn, because, again, you have this huge coronavirus. You have these two monstrous bills, which is going to which is basically going to legalize the deep state to commit any human rights abuses with impunity, and it's sanctioned by law. So why then are we having this fake anti-Semitism crisis coming up again, and Jeremy Corbyn kicked out of the Labour Party, even though he's a powerless backbencher? He has absolutely no power. He's lost completely control over the party. He's just another, MP from Islington North. Why is the fake anti-Semitism crisis back again when Jeremy? Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, let's start by making the point that Jeremy was never in control of the party, even when he was a leader of the party.
Exactly.
We had a mass membership of approaching 600,000, and I think it could have gone well above that. Could have gone, in excess of 1 million, maybe up towards 2 million, had we not got sidetracked by the whole anti-Semitism smear campaign, which was given traction by the response of the party hierarchy, by the response of the leadership, Jeremy, constantly seeking to appease these bad faith actors, to kind of accept that they were, there was some legitimacy to their accusations. Look, I mean, anti-Semitism is a cancer. It does exist in society, and I suspect that there may be some anti-Semites who have joined the Labour Party at some point. I've got to say, having been a member of the Labour Party for 44 years, I never met one. I did come across one or two examples of other forms of racism, very, very tiny, it's got to be said, but there were other examples of Islamophobia, of kind of, kind of misogyny, very, very tiny. But I honestly have never, ever witnessed any anti-Semitism. And indeed, I've spoken to Jewish members of the party who similarly have said they've never experienced it either. I mean, they're Jewish people who would be able to maybe spot it perhaps more clearly and recognize it, maybe more than somebody perhaps who's not come from a Jewish background like myself. But they've never. I mean, well, as one guy said that he experienced one example of anti-Semitism, I think back in mid-1970s or something. I mean, he'd been a member of the party 50 years or so. Mm-hmm. So it's been completely overblown, and the mistake that was made, as I say, is treating it as if these accusations were being made in good faith. They weren't. They were being. I mean, it was the Israel lobby was very much involved in this. The organisations behind the complaints are, they're kind of extreme Zionist organisations. The Campaign Against Anti-Semitism and the so-called Jewish Labour Movement are out and out Zionist groups. It's in their constitution.
And of course.
Beg pardon?
And of course, I can't stress this enough. Most of the people who were accused of anti-Semitism were Jewish people.
Well, many were, certainly, yeah. I mean, whether it's most.
Jackie Walker, Moshe Mochav.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Many probably, I don't know, indeed. There were quite a lot. I mean, people.
Glenn Secker. I mean, so many people who were kicked out of the Labour Party.
No, indeed, and it's anti-Zionist Jews that were targeted, of course. But yeah, I mean, it's and the reason I think that they're continuing to pursue Jeremy Corbyn is because they want to destroy any last vestiges, I suppose, of a kind of a socialist ethical foreign policy that actually supported the Palestinian people against the, an apartheid state of Israel. But you kind of got, so the point I was going to make is you kind of got the Israel lobby, the kind of Zionist lobby, which was being joined by the kind of the neoliberal lobby, the anti-socialist lobby. They could see that the anti-Semitism smears were gaining traction, and Bernie Sanders made a similar mistake. Instead of calling out these concocted smears for what they actually were, they treated them as if they were being made in good faith when they weren't. They were bad faith accusations.
Perfect that you say that, because I understand why everybody who loved Jeremy Corbyn is upset. However, and I'm even I don't know if you can see it, but I'm even wearing like a shirt in solidarity for Jeremy Corbyn. However, and anyone who has watched my show knows that I'm very hard on Jeremy Corbyn, and I have to be hard on Jeremy Corbyn because Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Shami Chakrabarti, Faiza Shaheen, Laura Pidcock, Navarra Media, all of these people who were the face of the Corbyn project, of the socialist reformist project, they all said there's an anti-Semitism crisis. We're dealing with it. Ash Sakar personally smeared, no, she didn't smear, she slandered Jackie Walker as an anti-Semite. Aaron Bastani said that there's an anti-Semitism crisis, and I think it's just because so many members of the Labour Party need more education on what anti-Semitism is, which was a bit of a dog whistle towards people from Muslim backgrounds, and they were not... Yeah.
There was no crisis in the Labour Party.
There was no crisis. There was no crisis. But John McDonnell, Rebecca Long-Bailey, when she was running to be leader of the Labour Party, Emily Thornberry, and Jeremy Corbyn himself all supported measures to make it more easier to kick out people just accused of anti-Semitism. Rebecca Long-Bailey even said that more people should have been tarred and feathered. People like you, even though what you said was not anti-Semitic, and you were just explaining, okay, if there has been anti-Semitism, well, we're being a bit too over apologetic because there's hardly anti-Semitism.
Well, the point I was making, Youri, was that we have a long tradition of fighting racism, and the Labour Party had done more to deal with the scourge of anti-Semitism than any other party. But we've been too apologetic about our record in tackling anti-Semitism. That was the point I was making. But no, I'm afraid that a lot of people that you mentioned there have just been no better than useful idiots. They gave additional momentum to the smears that were being pursued.
The organization Hope Not Hate as well also said.
Oh, well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's beyond the pale, that is. I mean, that organization really should be, instead of Hope Not Hate, it should be Hate Not Hope, I'm afraid to say. No, I mean, those organisations are completely discredited. Look, I mean, I think what we should have been saying, what Jeremy should have said from the outset, is, look, there may be a few rogue cases of anti-Semitism in the party, but the party is not institutionally anti-Semitic. This is a concocted smear campaign, and I'm not going to have any trouble with it. That's why I think he should have dealt with it and should have actually backed his closest comrades who are being targeted and thrown under the bus. Ken Livingston, myself, Jackie Walker, Mark Wadsworth. These are people who are very strong socialists, very strong Corbyn supporters, Corbyn advocates, who were being systematically targeted. And I actually predicted that ultimately, I mean, we actually posted a speech I made about 2.5 years ago, where I'd pointed out that they were targeting these various individuals, and they're never satisfied. They get one casualty, then they go for the next victim. And I'm saying at that point in time that they're after me now, but ultimately it's Jeremy that they want to topple. They want to topple Jeremy and topple the socialist program, the ethical foreign policy, the anti-imperialist policy, the pro-Palestinian policy that he represents. And that's what it's all about. And that's what's happened, of course, now. And now, as I say, this kind of maximalist strategy that they pursue, they've won essentially. They've gained control of the party, but they absolutely want to crush and destroy any semblance of socialism or indeed an ethical foreign policy within the party. And so essentially now what you've got is two establishment parties, as we have in the United States of America, where whoever gets in, there will be not a huge amount of difference in terms of the economic prospectus going forward, or indeed the foreign policy going forward. The military-industrial complex can rest easy in its bed, whoever gets in, whether it be Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson at the next election, because
but that said,
will be unduly disturbed.
But that said, and again, I understand why people are outraged and why people are speaking out against what's happening to Jeremy Corbyn because it's so ridiculous. The guy is a simple politician, a simple backbencher. The Blairites have won. And okay, and there are many socialists leaving the party, so it's going to be another rival oligarchic party. However, but the question this raises is, Carrie Ann Mendoza of the Canary has expressed a lot of outrage, but shouldn't we still be angry with Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, that leadership itself, when they said that there's an anti-Semitism crisis, we're dealing with it, which gave their opponents within Labour and outside all the ammunition they needed to continue the smear campaign? Jeremy Corbyn appointed Keir Starmer to be this Brexit secretary. He continued to say to people to support Keir Starmer. Rebecca Long-Bailey supported the witch hunt, and then she got witch hunted herself. Jeremy Corbyn appoints Tom Watson to be leader of the House of Lords. And Jeremy Corbyn showed no solidarity for people like you and others wrongly accused of anti-Semitism, slander this anti-Semitism, Jews and non-Jews alike. So therefore, again, Jeremy Corbyn, he dug his own grave. So shouldn't the response be, instead of demanding Jeremy Corbyn be reinstated and we keep bitching at the Labour Party, isn't this again a vindication that the Labour Party is not fit for purpose? This is a party that the left needs to build a new party. They need to join the Socialist Equality Party or some other party, and we need to en masse exodus that awful party, the Labour Party, which is just Tory light. And at this point, under Keir Starmer, they should just all merge with the Conservative Party, so that England can truly be a one nation Tory state.
Well, that's where we are now. I mean, I think it was a tactical decision that was taken, and it was just bad politics in the end. I mean, I think they hoped that by taking the positions that they did, it would draw a line under the anti-Semitism crisis, which it became, by constantly appeasing and capitulating and apologising, and it just didn't work. I mean, that was what was frustrating. I mean, I don't think it would have been the right strategy anyway, morally speaking, because we haven't got the problem that was being claimed, and I think it's important to stand up for your reputation. But there might have been some political justification for it if you could see it was actually making a difference, if it was working and actually minimising and stopping further attacks. But of course it didn't. All it did was to embolden them, as you say, just made them come on and make even more claims. I mean, now that Jeremy Corbyn has been suspended, the campaign against anti-Semitism has put forward a new hit list of 32 MPs that they want to see suspended, including some of the people who have been some of the biggest sort of protagonists of and joining in with the witch hunt. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, Stephen Kinnock, for example, I'm not sure if he's on that latest list, but he made a speech in support of the Palestinian people, which is good. I mean, and opposing the occupied territories. And I think he referred to the goods being imported from the occupied territories in Palestine by the Israeli state, illegal occupation, of course, let's remember, was effectively generating the proceeds of crime. And for that, he was pilloried in the so-called Jewish Chronicle, which is a very strongly pro-Israel newspaper in Britain. And other players were attacking him, and he ended up being severely censured over that. But what was interesting was that I was reminded of the Pastor Niemöller poem, First They Came, because not only did he not speak out when they came for me and others, when they came for me, he actually joined in the feeding frenzy. And now they're coming for him. I mean, as Pastor Niemöller points out in that poem, they came for the communist and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist, and they came for the trade unionist and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak out for me. And that's what's happening. I mean, and unless we recognize, you know, the importance of solidarity, and it's not just a word, you know, it should mean something. And I've made the point that, you know, solidarity is important when it's difficult, not just when it's easy. And they're learning that lesson, I think, the hard way. But your point about the future of the Labour Party, yes, I mean, I think the Labour Party is absolutely dead, and I do think we need to build a new nest, a new party. It is very difficult in a two-party, in a first past the post system, which actually tends to, you know, support a kind of two-party system. But when you've got two parties which are essentially two sides of the same coin, we need something different. We need something new, and that's why, in the first instance, I've been working with us to try and build a grassroots movement. But after that, I hope that we can then, through that, encourage a new party to emerge. I think if to establish a new party from on high in that sense, it would be more difficult for that to succeed and gain traction than if it emerged from the grassroots. And that's what I'm hoping that we can bring about. But, you know, none of this is easy because, you know, a lot of money is invested in the Labour Party, you know, with the big donors and so on, and they'll come back again. You know, they've got the infrastructure in place as well. So we would have to start from the very beginning. So, you know, it's not an easy task, but I think it's a task that we have to embark upon. And one of the things that I'm going to be starting, and I've been speaking about just this week actually, is a defund and disaffiliate campaign to encourage trade unions who are affiliated to the Labour Party, you know, they're paymasters to a large extent, actually defund the party, massively reduce the contribution to it, and preferably disaffiliate altogether. And let's have a party, a genuine working class party with representatives that do actually act as the political voice for the Labour movement. At the moment, that isn't happening. I mean, and it's like throwing good money after bad. Why are the trade unions supporting a party that is actually actively working against the best interests of their members? It makes no sense. But we need a grassroots campaign, I think, to force the trade unions to do that, because, you know, people get very comfortable in their positions in the movement, and what we're talking about is quite threatening in a way. It's quite scary because it's something new. It's a different approach, and I think that's one of the reasons why I was targeted, as well as my support for ethical foreign policy and support for Palestinians and so on, was my support for greater democracy in the party and greater accountability, and giving members the right to determine policy, and giving members the right across the piece, that is, and using digital technology like we're using today to have a much wider franchise, much wider democratic process in terms of determining policy, but also to give members the right to determine their candidates at all future elections rather than giving MPs a job for life. I mean, this is normal practice in most countries anyway, most democracies. It's not, you know, particularly novel, but it was seen as really radical when I was proposing it.
Are we at a point in time where parliamentarism and expecting Congress and local governments to do any good is dead, and it's to a point where people power movements, the anti-imperialist movement, social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, which is really all in one. I don't see them all as separate issues. I see it really all in one. That we can't expect anything anymore from governments. So we need to develop a movement, like you said, on the streets, disaffiliate ourselves from certain rival oligarchic parties and pseudo-left parties, and have a more adversarial relation where when we demand justice for Julian Assange, and we demand an end to the war in Syria, and we demand that the human trafficking network, which Jeffrey Epstein was the project manager of, we need to be out in the streets protesting and making life a living hell for those politicians, because just blindly accepting that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or having a Jeremy Corbyn in power, or having a Jacinda Ardern, or the NDP in Canada, or even thinking that Justin Trudeau or Obama will respond to the popular movements, which I think foolishly support them. That's just to a point where we can't trust these people anymore. So therefore, we just need to be protesting, campaigning, so that they know so that they even have to think not only once or twice, but 3 times before they ever pursue another criminal war or something truly, Dickensian, like like the whole back to work, back to school scheme. And if you get sick, tough shit, nobody's going to bail you out.
I mean, there's a crisis of representative democracy. I think there's no doubt about that. I mean, our representatives are not really representing the best interests of the wider general public. They're representing the interests of the corporate capitalists, actually, and the elites in society. And I do think we need to be demanding a different type of democracy, more of a participatory style democracy. And I think in terms of the mass movement that I'm talking about, we need to be, as well as protesting, actually thinking through some sort of practical solutions on the ground where we can kind of help ourselves in a way in which the Black Panther Party did in the 60s and so on, when there was a massive state failure to provide decent public services for the community. They kind of did it for themselves. So I think we need to look at some of those practical solutions, but ultimately we want to kind of change the political class, and we want to, in my opinion anyway, encourage, as well as doing those extra parliamentary activities, those street protests, the kind of campaign of civil disobedience, as well as doing kind of practical work as the Black Panthers did in terms of the school breakfast programs that they did, and if we can kind of help create worker cooperatives and that sort of thing. Those things are really important, but ultimately I think as well what we need to do is try and encourage new working class leaders to come through. And what we also, I think, have to bear in mind is that what we want, in my opinion, to achieve, and what we desperately need to achieve, is a system where we have both a mass social movement and an electoral strategy. Political parties that merely focus on electoral strategies at the and disregard the kind of the grassroots campaigning, this building that kind of social movement, ultimately run out of steam and often get embroiled in corruption and whatever else, and the public often will lose faith in them. And I think the great kind of example about how this kind of works and doesn't work for that matter has been Latin America, really, where you've got in Bolivia, for example, there was a coup against the Morales government there. He was thrown out, but through a campaign of a year, it's only a year ago, a campaign of civil disobedience, of action on the ground, they were able then, because a lot of people have portrayed this, this is a success of democracy, just shows how robust democracy actually is. But without that social movement on the ground, the campaign of civil disobedience and all the rest of it, then that electoral strategy would not have succeeded. So I think you need both. You need both an electoral strategy. We need to get our hands on the levers of power, because we know that they just very often will just ignore it. I mean, let's remember, we had around about 2 million people on the street in Britain opposing the Iraq war, and they still went ahead. So, there is a limit, I think, to what can be achieved through civil disobedience, but maybe we need to ratchet up the stakes in terms of the way in which we go about the sort of civil disobedience in terms of a tactic to make it more effective. But as I say, I think civil disobedience and street protest alongside practical initiatives on the ground are really important. That should be the role, in my opinion. Community arts and all that sort of stuff as well should be very much part of that social movement, but also with a view to raising political consciousness, raising political expectations, political education, and encouraging new working class leaders and others. It doesn't necessarily always have to come from the working class, but we want some working class people to come through, clearly, to then be able to pick up the cudgels and then get into use the electoral system to get into positions of power. But then I think when we get there, we need to be changing the way democracy operates. I mean, and the great Nye Bevan, the architect of the National Health Service, that great Labour politician, who was himself actually expelled from the Labour Party, believe it or not, back in the day, ultimately came back and, as I say, was the architect of the National Health Service. He said
you'll have to tell me off air why that.
Yeah, he said that the purpose of gaining power is to give it away, and that is something which I think we do need to take right to our heart. As socialists, to get power, it's about then to give that power to the wider community in that sense, and do it in a way, through participatory democracy, that then it's impossible to rein it back again. I mean, to bring about an irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power. And one of the things I was campaigning for within the Labour Party, actually, was to bring about a participatory democratic system, a participatory democracy inside the Labour Party. In other words, to put the grassroots members in the driving seat to determine policy and, as I've said, to select who their candidates should be in elections. And once that genie is out of the bottle, then it's very difficult, if not impossible, to sort of put it back in again. And that's why I think they were determined to smash me, to smash others who were, sympathetic to that as a way forward. And now, we've lost out on that. And again, I think, the mistake was made by the leadership in kind of compromising on those democratic reforms. They should have absolutely stuck rigidly and forced those democratic reforms through, because there's overwhelming support for it. It was only through a kind of stitch up with trade union delegations at the conference voting against the interests and the wishes of their own members to stop these democratic reforms going through. And that was the moment really where I think that, that was the moment really that the Corbyn project, that was a kind of a fatal blow that was struck against the Corbyn project. That was the beginning of the end of the Corbyn project, that 2018 conference. Because once those democratic reforms failed, that was another indication of the weakness of the leadership in that sense, to be able to drive through these changes. And they seized the moment. And, it was only a few months after that I was suspended. I mean, they ramped up the lurid accusations against me, and ultimately, pushed for my, and succeeded in pushing for my suspension. The General Secretary who took over from the previous one, who was supposed to be the great saviour, supposed to be on our side, I mean, she was no better. In fact, in my opinion, she was worse. The Jenny Formby regime was actually intensified the witch hunt. And, the rest is history. I mean, Jeremy's out, the project's dead, and the Labour Party is offering no opposition to the Tories now. So, that's not good for democracy.
But we really do need to build a new party. I mean, I advocate that people join the Socialist Equality Party and strengthen that party, because they're very much revolutionary socialism at home and anti-imperialism abroad. So they do know how to walk and chew gum at the same time. I don't think they'll make big waves in Scotland though, because of the Scottish nationalism, independence movement, which is not a bigoted movement, but still, you have many people in Scotland who would like to be an independent country and join back in the EU, rightly or wrongly. But that aside, but you're right. We do need to build. If people don't join that party, we do need to build something. Yeah. All of the stuff you just mentioned, because the Labour Party is it's just not going to happen in the Labour Party.
No, indeed. I just think that
even the Labour Party, even when the Labour Party was on paper a socialist party, it was always a controlled opposition party, and the socialism was only mild reforms, and there was still imperialism overseas until Lee Ben never got anywhere near power. And then when there was a compromise candidate like Michael Foot, he was just not television friendly against the Margaret Thatcher. And then and then you have a Neil Kinnock, and then that doesn't work. And then you have the Blair Witch Project and the Brown Project and Ed Miliband. And even if they don't always win, and even when they do win, we still get voodoo. We still get voodoo economics, and we still have this plutocratic, neo-Dickensian, neo-Orwellian regime, which is why I remember last time I interviewed you, I was saying to you, shouldn't we all just join the Conservative Party now? Because it seems as if even when we have a Jeremy Corbyn, the country keeps going to the right.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think actually where the public are at in the country, they're more on the left in reality. I mean, they're more radical even than the program that the party was putting forward under Jeremy Corbyn. So I think there is an appetite for the sort of agenda that we were putting forward. And, But I think as far as setting up a new party is concerned, I just think that again is too much of a focus on the kind of electoral strategies, if that's going to be the saviour. And I think unless you actually have it embedded in the community, so I think the starting point for me must be a social movement. I mean, there's no point in having I don't think anyway, I mean, a political party that's kind of divorced from the people that we're supposed to be representing. I don't think that's going to cut through. If we're serious about cutting through in a two-party system, then you're going to have a lot of popular support. I mean, we might feel good about creating a new party, and you know, we can be, as it were, exercising our kind of our principles in that sense, in, you know, supporting a new party. But if that new party is unable to capture much electoral support, I mean, there's not much point in that. So you end up putting a lot of effort into creating a new party, and it goes nowhere. Wouldn't it be better to use that energy, or indeed trying to change the Labour Party, which is impossible? Wouldn't it be better to use that energy on trying to build a grassroots movement? Because you have the twin benefit of being able to hopefully ultimately encourage a new political party to emerge from the grassroots. So it's kind of got that sort of traction, it's embedded in the community. But you've also got the benefit of being able to do some kind of practical projects that can make a difference on the ground, in spite of the kind of political class, whatever they're doing, in terms of community arts, as I've said, potentially school breakfasts, and you know, worker cooperatives, and a range of different projects like that, and also around, you know, promoting the kind of street protests, civil disobedience, and making some gains both at a local level, in forcing local authorities to take up certain positions, but also in terms of, you know, challenging national politicians as well. I think that would be more rewarding, just in terms of your time, because we're all busy people and there's only so many hours in the day. I mean, where we're going to devote our energies, what we're going to put our resources into.
In fact, the great, you know, one of the best presidents that America never had, four times over, Ralph Nader, the great.
Yeah, indeed.
The great campaigner. I mean, without him, we would not have any laws on the books to protect us from, you know, polluted waters and you know, cars without seatbelts and so forth. And anywho, great person. He once said that while it's important to build people power movements, you still need to get into the halls of power to legislate those. It's not good just having an adversarial relationship with people who are in the back pockets of the 1%. You do actually need sincere politicians in power to implement the laws which which we think is going to save the world from climate destruction, as well as radically change the system for the better. So you do need that two-man approach, the adversarial social movements, but the people in power. I just don't think I just think that that's not going to happen if people continue to support the Democrats and Labour, be it in Australia, New
Zealand. There are movements now. I mean, and I'm nearly at the end of my time, actually, Youri, as well. Actually, I need to have gone over slightly. I've got another interview to move on to, unfortunately. But no, I mean, but there are movements now. I mean, obviously in the States as well, there's a movement for a People's Party, and I think the appetite is growing for something. The recognition that the Democrats in the States are not fit for purpose, and they are part of the problem. And similarly in this country, the recognition that the Labour Party is not going to bring about the change that is desperately required. And if we're serious about dealing with climate catastrophe and so on, if we're serious about dealing with inequality and poverty, then we need a totally different approach. We need to press the reset button. That is not going to happen with either the Democrats or with the Labour Party. And all the hope that was invested in Jeremy Corbyn, of course, has been dashed now. So we've got to start again. But we've got no choice. We have to do it.
Well, on that note, Chris, I know you have to go, so we were joined on this.
Sorry, I'm slightly over. I've got another appointment where I've got to speak to.
Anywho, so
they've been chasing me now. I can see my phone's been going in the background here.
All right, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Chris Williamson. I hope Zoom does not crash so that I can upload this. If not, so I'll make sure to invite you again. Until then, Chris, thank you very much for joining us. And by the way, thank you for the advice that you gave the last time you were on the show. The reason why I'm continuing 1+1 is because of that wonderful advice you gave me and those 2 appearances. So until then,
Nice.
Talk to you later.
All the best. Cheers. Thank you. Cheers, Corbyn. Bye now. Bye.
Ciao.
Cheers.